It always does, doesn't it? A whisper in the dark, too faint to catch at first, but once it gets into your head, it's impossible to shake off. I can't remember the exact date when everything began, but I can tell you it was a time that felt like life was finally on track. I was in my early 30s, had a stable job, a girlfriend I was planning to marry, and a house. My parents had given it to me just like they had inherited it from their parents. It's one of those houses that looks like it could be haunted just by the way it stands, an old, creaky two-story brick house surrounded by dense woods on all sides. I'd lived in the house for years, but I never really noticed how isolated it was until things started happening. It's in a quiet town, the kind where everyone knows everyone's business, and for the most part we stayed out of trouble. My girlfriend Anna and I would often walk through the woods at the back of the property, talking about anything and everything, just enjoying the silence that comes with living so far out of town. But that silence, I've learned, doesn't last forever. It was late October when I first noticed the strange tracks. Anna and I had just gotten home from work, it was just getting dark and the air had that crisp, fall bite to it. I stepped out of the car and immediately froze. There, in the yard, were fresh footprints leading from the woods to the front door. The snow had started falling just the day before, so these prints were recent. And they weren't the kind of tracks I'd expect to see. They were barefoot prints, big enough that I could tell whoever had left them wasn't small, but there was something strange about them. The way they were spaced out was wrong, too far apart. It was like the person was dragging their feet, but not in a tired way, more like they were forcing themselves to walk. I didn't say anything to Anna right away. I didn't want to freak her out, but my heart was already pounding in my chest. The tracks led directly to our front door, but they didn't go inside. They stopped at the threshold and turned around, heading back into the woods. I chalked it up to some local kid playing a prank or maybe even an animal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I decided I'd keep an eye on it. The next few days were uneventful, but that feeling, like something was watching, never quite left. I would catch glimpses of movement in the trees at the edge of the property, but when I would look closer, there was nothing there. It could have been an animal, sure, but there was something off about the way the shadows moved. They didn't seem natural. Then one night, a few weeks later, Anna was at work and I was home alone. I decided to take a walk around the property, clear my head. I made it to the edge of the woods and stood there for a moment, listening to the sounds of the night. It was dead quiet, too quiet. No crickets, no rustling of leaves. Just silence. And then I heard it. A sound coming from deeper in the woods, like something was scraping against the ground. I couldn't make it out at first, but it sounded like something, or someone, was dragging their feet through the leaves. I took a step back, ready to head inside, but then I saw it. A figure just beyond the tree line, standing perfectly still. It was tall, impossibly tall, and it was looking directly at me. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. It was like my body refused to obey. The figure didn't move either, just stood there watching me. After what felt like an eternity, it finally turned and disappeared into the woods. I didn't know what to think. My mind was racing with all sorts of explanations. Maybe it was a prank, maybe it was an animal, or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew this was different. The next morning, I woke up to find the footprints again. Only this time, they were all over the property. Around the house, near the windows, along the back fence. But there was one thing that stood out. There were more of them. And they didn't stop at the door. These prints led all the way around the house, past the windows, and even near the back door. I grabbed my phone and took a picture, sending it to Anna. She didn't respond right away, but when she did, her message was short and blunt. "We need to leave." That's when I started getting nervous. Anna had always been the rational one. She didn't scare easily, but she was scared now. I tried to push the thoughts out of my head. It had to be someone messing around, right? A local kid, maybe. Someone who'd wandered into our yard for some reason. But I knew deep down that this wasn't a prank. Not anymore. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a walk through the woods. I figured if I could find the source of the footprints, I'd feel better. I grabbed a flashlight, my jacket, and my rifle, just in case. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I needed to know what was going on. As I walked deeper into the woods, the air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around me. It was eerily quiet, except for the crunch of my boots on the frozen ground. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was being watched. I kept hearing sounds, faint rustling, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. Then, about a mile in, I found something. It wasn't much, a small clearing with a few broken branches scattered on the ground, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. There was a faint trail of footprints, but this time they weren't human. They were something else. Larger, more elongated, with strange, claw-like markings in the dirt. My heart pounded as I backed away, the feeling of being watched intensifying. I turned to head back to the house, but as I did, I heard a voice, low, guttural, and almost incomprehensible. It was coming from behind me, just beyond the trees. I didn't dare look back. I ran. When I got back to the house, Anna was waiting for me, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She'd heard the voice too. "That thing in the woods," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not just watching us anymore. It's following us." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to explain it. All I knew was that whatever it was, it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. The days that followed were a blur of tension. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was out there just beyond the edge of the trees, always watching. Anna was on edge too, unable to sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of what could be lurking in the dark. It was after a particularly long night of restless tossing and turning that we decided to take action. We weren't just going to sit back and wait for whatever was stalking us to make its move. We needed to confront it, face it head on. I spent the morning preparing. I grabbed my rifle again, checking the ammo, making sure everything was in working order. But this time I wasn't going alone. Anna insisted on coming with me. At first I tried to talk her out of it, but she wouldn't budge. She was just as determined as I was to figure out what was going on. By the time the afternoon sun began to dip behind the horizon, we were standing at the edge of the woods. The wind had picked up, rustling the branches, and the air had turned cold, colder than it had any right to be for that time of year. Anna gripped my arm tightly, her eyes scanning the trees nervously. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I stopped, straining my ears. There it was again. That scraping sound. The one I had heard before, late at night, when I had been standing at the edge of the woods alone. Only this time it was closer. Much closer. Before I could respond, I saw it. A flash of movement between the trees, like something, or someone, darting in and out of the shadows. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. My fingers tightened around the rifle, and I slowly turned to Anna. "Stay close," I told her, my voice low and steady, despite the panic rising in my throat. "Whatever this is, we're not going to give it a chance to surprise us." We ventured deeper into the woods, moving carefully, trying to avoid making too much noise. Every snap of a twig beneath our feet made my stomach drop. Every rustle in the leaves made my skin crawl. It was as if the woods themselves were alive, watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake. And then we found it. It wasn't much, a small clearing in the woods, just a patch of dirt with scattered leaves and broken branches, but something about it made my blood run cold. It felt off, like something unnatural had happened here. There was a faint smell in the air, like decaying earth, mixed with something rancid, almost metallic. "Do you see that?" Anna asked, pointing to the ground. At first, I didn't know what she was talking about, but then I saw it. In the dirt, barely visible, was a set of marks. They weren't footprints this time, but something else. Circular impressions, as if something had been dragged across the ground. And they weren't just on the surface. These marks went deep into the earth, like whatever had made them had been pulling itself through the dirt, leaving a trail behind. I bent down, inspecting the marks. There was something odd about them, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. They looked almost unnatural, like they were carved into the earth by something that didn't belong here. Suddenly, Anna gasped. I turned around just in time to see her stumbling back, her face pale with terror. "It's behind us," she whispered, her voice trembling. I spun around, rifle raised, ready for whatever was out there. But there was nothing. The clearing was empty. No movement. No sound. Just the wind rustling the trees. But I didn't feel safe. I could feel it now, that presence. It was close. Too close. My eyes darted around, scanning the trees, trying to spot any hint of movement. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being surrounded. That whatever it was closing in. And then I saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows of the trees. It was tall, too tall for a human, and its form was distorted, like it was made of shadows itself, stretching and warping as it moved. I couldn't make out any details of its face, but I didn't need to. The presence was enough to make my blood run cold. "Run," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Without another word, I grabbed Anna's hand and we bolted. We ran through the woods, dodging trees, tripping over roots, until we finally broke out into the open, gasping for breath. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, watching, waiting. We didn't speak as we made our way back to the house, but when we finally reached the safety of our front door, Anna collapsed onto the couch, her face drained of color. I stood by the window, my eyes scanning the edge of the woods, searching for any sign of movement. It was then that I realized something I hadn't considered before. This thing wasn't just following us. It was hunting us.